been here. I want to give a huge thanks to Steve Holmer and Sarah Greenberger. Just on a personal note, I'm one person here at Tucson Audubon Society, and I really rely on their action alerts and information coming in. So it's a big honor for me to see you guys' faces and thank you in person. But thanks so much for your work. And usually I would introduce you guys, but I'm actually going to ask you guys to introduce yourself so people can see your videos and pin you to the top if they would like. So let's start with Steve, if you wouldn't mind just telling us who you are, what you do, and maybe your spark bird or your favorite bird.
Well, sure. I'm Steve Holmer, Vice President of Policy for American Bird Conservancy. I've been there for 13 years now, and have the honor of trying to work to advance bird conservation in Congress and hopefully with the next administration. And I'd say some of my spark birds are the marbled murrelet and the cerulean warbler.
Awesome.
I also like the western yellow-billed cuckoo a lot.
So do we. Oh, thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Nicole. And I want to thank everyone for having me, and to Tucson Audubon for being such a really strong partner to the National Audubon and our advocacy work. I know Nicole has come to DC to help us with the fly-in, and many of you were really active when we were working very hard in Arizona to protect the National Arctic Wildlife Refuge. So I just want to thank all of you for that and warn you that my children are coming home at some point during this call, so I haven't had the chance to read them the Riot Act. So apologies if I get a Post-it note on my forehead or some fingers tapping on my shoulder. You'll forgive me. So I am the Senior Vice President for Conservation Policy at the National Audubon Society. I'm also, for the moment, acting as our Interim Chief Conservation Officer. I've been at Audubon for about 3.5 years at this point. I came from the Interior Department, where I was working in the Secretary's office on endangered species, landscape scale conservation, climate adaptation, and had the pleasure of working on sage-grouse conservation. So I have to say that's still my favorite bird. It was really a sort of extraordinary experience to go through that process. And I'm thrilled to be here, so thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, sage-grouse are just pretty amazing birds just to look at and do and enjoy. All right, I just want to remind everyone that this is our 4th Free to Fly webinar. And all those videos are available online. If there's something that seems like you've missed at this point, feel free to check those out. Some topics we've already gone over are just the amazingness of birds here in Arizona and why migration is important, particularly here to our flyways. And then why and how that links for us as bird appreciators to issues of policy and how policy can really make a difference here in our everyday lives. And then we went a little bit over how things like policy and conservation can impact more than just birds. It can impact our public health and our public lands and lots of things that we care about. So today we're going to focus on some bedrock bird protection laws and a new one that hopefully will be put into place to strengthen it. So that's a little teaser here. So we're going to rely on Sarah and Steve to answer these questions for us. And then hopefully we're going to be able to help them out by making these things happen. So Sarah, let's start with you. If you could give us like an elevator pitch on the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, what it is, why it's important, and how it connects us.
Happy to. So the Migratory Bird Treaty Act was passed in 1918 to implement a series of treaties to protect migratory birds in the face of the plume trade and the havoc that was wreaking on bird populations across the world, and especially in the US. And it really was a founding achievement and sort of organizing effort for the National Audubon Society. It was a movement of chapters around the country to come together and band together to end the plume trade. and pass state laws, and then a federal law that would be that backstop. So it really is our founding story and why we have this really incredible network of bird lovers and advocates across the country stems from the movement and the advocacy to pass those laws at the state and federal level. And I think the reason, it's still so important, even though, the plume trade is not the biggest threat, is because it really has been the tool over the past 50 years, especially, that agencies, wildlife agencies at the state and federal level, and advocates like all of us use to make sure that best management practices to minimize harm to birds are implemented in projects that are happening every day across the country. So whether it's building roads and bridges or oil and gas pits or turbines or transmission lines, buildings, right? The tool that we use to make sure to hold companies, industries accountable to implement those best management practices is the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Very few states have laws, or if they do, they aren't implementing them. They don't have the infrastructure or staff to do that. And the Endangered Species Act only covers endangered birds, whereas there are 1,000 birds that are protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. So it really has been, an incredibly important tool, and one that's under threat, which we'll talk about later, and why we really need everyone's help to make sure it remains an issue that people care about at a time when there's so many challenges to the environment.
That's perfect. Thank you. Which kind of rolls us into our next question here for Steve. Why are we talking about the Migratory Bird Treaty Act right now? And maybe you can introduce us to the Migratory Bird Protection Act and kind of how these things work together.
Sure. Well, we've been interested in trying to strengthen the Migratory Bird Treaty Act for a while to better implement incidental take so that the best management practices that we have would really be used. So we had actually done some work with the last administration to try to move ahead with a permitting system for incidental take, and there was in fact a notice of intent. Unfortunately, that was not completed. But then when we had the new administration came in, they actually issued a new legal opinion that basically said that the law does not cover incidental take at all. And they've actually
know what incidental take is? Steve, do you just want to take a minute and
Incidental take is kind of the foreseeable but accidental killing of birds. And so as you do certain types of development, you're just going to see certain amounts of bird losses. And so the law is supposed to protect against that. And we have done a lot of great work with industries over the decades to develop practices that greatly reduce bird mortality, putting screens over oil pits, changing the lights on tall towers, changing how power lines are built and marked, et cetera. So there's a lot of things that we can be doing. And as a result of the administration's policy change, it was a real setback. There was no longer enforcement. There was no longer an incentive for industry to continue moving forward with these efforts. And so this was challenged in court by a coalition of a couple different coalitions of groups, as well as 8 states. And I think that the reading of the law is fairly clear that the birds should be protected in this way. So I think there's a good chance that we prevail. But meanwhile, Congress has stepped up and responded to this attack on the law by offering up the Migratory Bird Protection Act. Representative Alan Lowenthal introduced the bill. It's HR 5552. And what it does is it makes abundantly clear that the law covers this type of incidental take. And at the same time, it moves forward to give the Fish and Wildlife Service the authority to create general permits so that we can better regulate some of these sectors and implement the best management practices that we've already developed. And so it would create a kind of a secondary process where there would then be rule makings to look at things like power lines, to look at the towers. And I think just implementing the progress to date, I think we would see a great reduction in bird mortality over time. So I think we have a lot to build on. We greatly appreciate Representative Lowenthal for stepping up with this leadership, and so we can talk about the bill is progressing quite nicely.
Okay, that sounds good. So back to Sarah. What has Audubon's response been to these rollbacks? And can people still get involved to protect the MBTA, or are we kind of focusing now on the Protection Act?
Yeah, I think both. And, you know, just to be clear, right, the way that the administration has interpreted the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, it only applies to hunting and poaching. So the only way that you could be held accountable is if you intend to go out and kill or harm a bird. So if the Deepwater Horizon were to explode today, right, back in 2010, there was $100 million of damages that were fined that they had to pay for bird conservation. But of course, they didn't go out and build the oil and gas rig with the intent of killing birds. So today, that fine, Justice Department would not pursue that kind of fine. Well, towers, right, as Steve said, have no communications towers, transmission towers, no obligations to implement best management practices because the intent of building those is not to kill birds. So it's a huge step back in the scope of the law and the protections that it provides. And there are two things happening at the same time. So one is the congressional effort to really make clear that the original law was meant to apply to this incidental, right, take and require this permit system. The second is the administration continues to move forward and try and cement and put more legal weight behind the opinion so that it will be harder to undo in a new administration. And that process is going on now. There's an open comment period, right? So you can go on to our website, I'm sure the Steve's as well, and find action alerts and ways that you can comment and participate in that process, that rulemaking process. And we have a draft chapter letter on Audubon Works, if that's something your chapter, either Tucson Audubon or I see we have people from all over the country would like to pursue. So both engaging your members and telling them how important it is to advance the Migratory Bird Protection Act, to make clear that these protections are in place and are important, and continuing to engage, right, with the administration and make our voices clear are two ways that everyone here can engage right now. And I think the reason that it is so important to raise our voices is because, right, there's so, as I said before, there's so much that's happening, right, to the environment, so many rules that are being pushed back, so much that we need to address, that when this opinion first came out, it was in Christmas 2017, December 23rd. When we went to our normal allies, right, who are huge conservationists and leaders on Capitol Hill and started talking about the Migratory Bird Protection Act, they were like, what, right? Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, Paris, right? They weren't thinking about how important this law is. But we had 500 organizations, including over 300 Audubon chapters, sign a letter to Congress. People engaged their local reporters. We had many of you who signed action alerts, and it really elevated the profile of this issue. And as a result, it's now a priority for someone like Representative Lowenthal to move the Migratory Bird Protection Act. It was included in the House Climate Committee's report as a priority piece of a climate agenda that was released this past week. And that's because of our advocacy. And so we have to keep making this visible. We have to keep showing our legislators and even the record for this administration to show that we care. So if we get a new administration, they prioritize this. And if we continue to make progress in Congress, right, we have a lot of weight. We build on the momentum we'll need to actually make this kind of provision become law. Because the truth is, every industry under the sun would be very happy to remain unregulated, right? And that includes some that are often been friends of the environment and clean energy, wind, solar, right? That the Democratic Party, who are normally our allies, really want to see advance. So it's a big fight. We need all of your help. There's ways you can engage right now, 2 active avenues on the Hill and in the administration. And I hope that you'll take us up on it.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sarah. And we'll make sure, thanks Steve for posting that in the chat, that those action alerts go out to everyone after this webinar. And so next for Steve, we talked a little bit about this before we got started here, but are there things that we can be helping you with right now for the Protection Act, especially if there are like members of Congress specifically that we can be reaching out to? What are kind of the steps that we need to take today to help?
Sure. Well, the bill has already been approved by the House Natural Resources Committee, and we've been promised that it will receive a vote on the House floor. So it is doing really well. We are on the very last day of the co-sponsor drive. We currently have 85 co-sponsors in the House and would love to get that up to 100 by the end of today. And so in Arizona, Representative Grijalva and Galiga were both original co-sponsors, and Representative Kirkpatrick has since signed on. But we have not yet seen support from Representative O'Halloran and Sten. So they would be great folks to reach out to and ask to become co-sponsors. And then I don't know if any folks have contacts in nearby New Mexico, but Representative Torres Small and particularly Assistant Speaker Lujan would be great people to reach out to. So, and I would just mention, to build on what Sarah said, we're seeing tremendous support for the bill. Quite a few senior leaders in the Democratic House have endorsed the bill. We have support from the House leadership. So we're very hopeful to see this move through the House this session of Congress. And then of course we need to get it moving through the Senate. And there are going to be a number of stimulus and infrastructure bills that affect all of this type of development. So there are actually avenues for a bill like this to become law fairly quickly. Obviously, the further we get this session of Congress, the better shape we'll be in next year. Hopefully we'll see a good election and be in a good position to move things forward next year. So I'd be happy to answer any questions. But yeah, there, in addition to what Sarah mentioned on the comment deadline, is July 20th for the comments on the regulatory rollback. And there is going to be a coalition sign-on letter that chapters and others will be able to sign on to, that we're working on with our DC partners. So that'll be coming up.
Great. Yeah, okay, that gives us a date. Good. And it sounds like today's important as well. So we have got 2 dates that we need to work on. So I'll make sure all that information gets out to everyone and the contacts for those offices. So I make it easy for everyone today. And so I would encourage everyone to start sending in questions at this point. I did get a couple by email that we can start with, but we have one from Faye here too. So is HR 5552 to amend the MBPA, or is this a completely new act? Okay.
It would in part amend the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, and it would also grant the Fish and Wildlife Service new authority. And so we believe that the law actually already provides the service these authorities, but it would just make it abundantly clear that they could move forward with some stakeholder processes to regulate these sectors that are known to kill birds.
Yeah, and we want to be really clear that we have the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, right? That's the original one. And the new one is the Migratory Bird Protection Act. So 2 things going on here. So a couple of good questions that I got from people over email before, when this had originally gone out, was people are wondering why all these rollbacks are happening right now. And I think there are a couple obvious answers to that, but is there a strategy here? And should we be looking at something a little bit deeper that's going on? I think Sarah or Steve or both can answer any of these questions.
Yeah, I'll start, and welcome Steve to fill in. I think that for many years now, there's been a growing narrative that environmental protection comes at the expense of jobs in the economy. And we know that's not true, right? Since the bedrock foundational environmental laws, not just the MBTA, which was, precedent setting, but the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, we've certainly seen exponential economic growth in this country. And in fact, we know they're self-reinforcing. but there's been a really strong narrative, right, paid for by industry that these protections, undermine the economy and cost jobs. And it's become increasingly difficult to sustain and advance environmental protection. That was true under the Obama administration. I can tell you as a member of it, there was enormous pressure to be light in the amount of regulation, to find efficiencies. And decision makers felt that their success, their elections, all depended on that was the will of their voters. And that's accelerated, right, with this administration, who is extremely adversarial to any sort of environmental protection, and has made it its mission, right, to have energy dominance and to roll back as quickly as possible on as many fronts as possible any environmental regulation, to the extent that during this pandemic, the EPA said companies no longer need to report any environmental infractions, and they are not going to do any enforcement. There was an executive order from this president saying every agency should look for every authority to bypass environmental statutes, NEPA, et cetera, during this crisis. So we're seeing, I think, the extreme outgrowth of a movement that's been underway for years. And it's why our voices are so important. And it's so important for us to be visible and be clear with the people that represent us that we think this is fundamental and their jobs depend on their being advocates for these rules.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I would add to that. I totally agree with that. I think we do need to create a counter narrative that we need stronger protections. And last fall, we had the 3 billion birds report come out showing there's been a broad decline. It's clear we need to be doing more. I think the one thing I would add that's particular to this administration is their extreme climate denial. And if you look at their policies, almost everything gets back to the idea of more oil and gas drilling, whether it's focusing on priority sage-grouse habitats or knocking down all the regulatory barriers. It really seems like the oil and gas industry is kind of driving all policy decisions right now.
Okay. Yeah, all right, we're getting a couple other questions in here. Hyatt wants to know, do you need co-sponsors from Colorado?
I think honestly, everyone reaching out, your legislators hearing from you, whether they're already co-sponsors and so it's a thank you, which our systems can automatically generate, right? If your member is already a co-sponsor, the letter you send will be a thank you. And if they aren't, it will be that request. The more they hear, the more it justifies those who are already doing the right thing and pushes those who need to be. And I know people often ask me, right, does it matter if I send this form letter? And before Interior, I did work on the Hill, and I will tell you that every week there are reports. How many letters came in on, or action alerts or form letters came in on this issue versus this issue versus this issue. And so while it always adds value to make a call or to send your own letter, even sending a form letter demonstrates to a member that this issue matters to their constituents.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and something we've been doing here at Tucson Audubon, something I've been encouraging people to do is sending in their personal stories. And so one of our initiatives right now focuses on people sending in stories on their favorite birds in Arizona, but could be anywhere, just to help make that connection that this is more than just this bill. It's more than, even just birds, and helping make those really personal connections for people. So, and you can always edit form letters to include those. You can send them in separately. Those are all options. Okay.
Put it on social media. I mean, I think the only thing, I'm sorry,
go ahead.
But I think that, we have hashtag we have for a while at Audubon that birds tell us,
Mhm.
right? Birds tell us that the environment is in trouble. They tell us that our climate is changing. And I think, you know, in this time when people are spending so much of their day staring out their window, I think people have come to appreciate birds, right? And the value and joy that they bring, but also that they can be indicators. There is that canary in the coal mine, right, aspect to it. And when the 3 billion birds study came out, you know, I got a call from Senator Schumer's office, you know, minority leader in the Senate, saying, everyone here is talking about this. You know, what should we be doing? I was like, well, there's bird safe buildings that's moving right now. Like, I mean, there's things, right, that they could do. I think just the power of birds and the emotional connection people have, you know, all of us have appreciated, but it's just something that's continued to grow. And so when we do talk about, right, our love for birds, when we talk about, right, if they're in trouble, if we've lost 3 billion birds in the last 50 years, and, you know, Audubon released a study last year that 2/3 are at risk of extinction from climate going forward, it doesn't get easier. That says something about, you know, that we are also at risk. And I think now is a time that people get that, right, as we all sit at our homes more than ever. So I think there really is power to those stories that you tell. And I think we have a platform that has an emotional resonance that can really matter.
Yeah, that's great. Let me go back a little bit here on questions. Nancy wants to know, are you able to get meetings with the Trump administration? Do they seem to take you seriously, or are you just dismissed?
We can get meetings, and there are areas where we have made progress, especially on some Western Water and Colorado River issues. Is a place where the administration has been strong. It's one of the few, but it, I think, is clear that we, as in a community, do not have the kind of influence that industry, and especially the oil and gas and other extractive industries, have. And there is not trust, right? We'll get read statements we've made in the press. There is a lot of, I would go so far as to say, hostility. So it is not an easy relationship.
Yeah.
Steve, would you?
Friend Steve.
Steve came to see me all the time when I worked at Interior, so.
It's not quite the same as coming to lobby you on sage grouse. You know, we're not seeing, you know, the same kind of dialogue. So that is definitely, you know, unfortunate. But, like, you know, one area, the Working Lands for Wildlife programs through the Farm Bill, I'd say, is one thing that's working right now. We're actually drafting up kind of the, you know, next administration policy, and we basically need to fix just about everything except for that. Seems to be working. Handful of other things, but no, we're looking forward to kind of getting back to some of the smart, reasonable policies that we were seeing before, because we need, you know, more protection on one side to get to that 30% land protection goal that everybody agrees we need to get to, you know, to fully mitigate the you know, continuing development. There's things that we need to put in place to make sure that we are actually going to have a framework that's sustainable.
Yeah. Carol would like to know what the status of bipartisan support is, if any. Yeah.
Right now,
go ahead, Steve. You start.
Yeah, the bill has 5 co-sponsors, Republican co-sponsors on the House bill, so it is good bipartisan effort there. And on the Senate side, Senator Van Hollen has expressed interest in leading there. He is looking for somebody to partner with, a Republican senator. And so we have been having meetings on that and talking to senators. So in all of our action alerts, we include the Senate, and, you know, assuming that the bill will be coming over there soon and that we're going to need to see action there. So if you have some contacts with Republican senators, we're kind of looking and thirsting for leadership there. I think, you know, they're missing an opportunity, is my opinion, given how popular birds are.
You know, I think there's a reality, right, in terms of sort of the ideology of the parties, that the Migratory Bird Protection Act is regulation. It regulates industry and requires that they take certain steps and get a permit, right, to take birds. And right now they have no obligation. They are in a position where every industry is completely unregulated in this space. And so to find Republicans who want to advocate for re-regulating all industry is a challenge. It's a challenge, and it's a challenge in the Senate especially. I think, honestly, that's why the administrative action and congressional action are so interlinked, that if we get a new administration and we make this enough of a priority that they start to take action to re-regulate, right, they can do that. They can go back to the way it was. They can say, all of you are covered. That will be an incentive for industry to go to their members and start having a conversation about how we can really cement this authority in law, because we will still need to do that even if we get a friendly administration who starts to take action. So they work together, and so we need to be engaged in both. And that's why this is such an important time to elevate this issue and make clear how important it is, because something Steve said earlier is really true. There's going to be a lot of infrastructure funding, and there should be, to bring this country out of the recession, depression, and move us forward, especially to have a cleaner economy. But if we are doing that with a weakened NEPA, a weakened Endangered Species Act, a weakened Migratory Bird Treaty Act, the conflict that we know doesn't have to be there, right, becomes exacerbated with protection. So we need to be really vocal that we want to see clean energy, we want to see public transportation, we want to see all of those things that'll help us move forward, but we also need to elevate strengthening, putting back these protections that have been important for so long, and we need to see them together. And we need to make that a priority for a new administration, and that's on us. And that's why all of you are so important. And now is such an important moment to really be elevating this issue.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and it can be really confusing what the role of the administration is in making rules and opinions and all these confusing things versus policy that we can move through. So thanks for talking about that. We got a question from Kathleen on what are we doing to encourage industry partners such as oil and gas, not just political partners? Question, Kathleen.
There are a lot of working groups, and actually, transmission companies have been really strong for many years, in part under the umbrella of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, came to the table, formed a working group with Audubon and other conservation organizations to develop a set of best practices. And that working group continues, those partnerships continue, and many, especially of the larger companies, will understand that this current situation we're in may not continue. And so there are a lot of companies who will say we're still doing what we were supposed to do before. There are still some oil and gas companies that I know we as Audubon have worked with in various geographies who say, we're still going to cover those oil pits. But the longer we go, I think without a regulatory obligation, the harder it will be for those companies to continue taking those steps as others stop, right? It puts them at a disadvantage. It makes their work more expensive. So we do continue to have those conversations, and there are some strong in many forums around wind, around solar, around oil and gas, around transmission, but and there are still obviously good actors, but we have to get this framework back in place for that to be sustainable over the long run.
Anything to add there, Steve, or are you good?
No, I think that nails it. I mean, even with the oil and gas sector, after they developed the screens over pits, some companies develop closed loop water systems so that they don't even have pits and can reuse the resource. So, you know, by adopting this best management practice philosophy, it can actually make industry more efficient over time. We've seen that with the tall tower lighting. We learned that the tall towers can turn off their steady burning lights. Well, that's going to save them thousands of dollars in electricity costs. So there are some solutions that I think that are just make common sense, and we need to have a process to bring them to bear. For wind energy, we've developed guidelines, and you know, we think they would be pretty effective. Unfortunately, they're not being used very much, and so we need to have a process to bring these good ideas into reality.
Yeah, we need those incentives in place to help. All right, so I think we're coming up on a good time. We got one question from Paul. I'll try to read it, it's kind of long.
I was reading it actually.
Okay.
It was sort of, is it worth it to submit comments to the administration? It seems like they just ignore them. And it's funny because we actually had that debate, right? If we're going to send an action alert, is it worth asking people to submit their comments to the administration, or should we be directing them to Congress since we have both things going on at the same time? And we actually prioritize Congress for the very reason that Paul articulates. And we have sign-on letters for chapters, and there are models that you can use that we have on Works again that you can submit on your own. I know we have partners who are sending comments into the administration, but we figured it was a better use of time to focus on really substantive comments that could build a record that we could use for legal challenge on the rule, but to get those voices into Congress to make clear that there are people out here who care and want to see this legislation move forward. So that's something we struggle with, you know, every time there's an administrative action, right? Is it worth asking people to weigh in? Are there better options? And we talk about that. And I think often it is important to show that people care. But when there's something we think is a better use of your time, we try and direct you there.
Right.
Yeah, we agree. We try to focus our alerts on Congress, but at the same time, we continue to engage the federal agencies, because I think in a lot of cases, the agencies are being directed to do things that they know are not right and that don't actually fulfill their mission. And so we want to try to keep them on their toes so that, you know, when the wheel turns, that they're going to be ready to get back to doing their job. And in fact, on this Migratory Bird Treaty Act draft environmental impact statement, the Fish and Wildlife Service admitted that this rule will harm birds. And so they actually put a lot of information into the draft EIS that was actually harmful to their rulemaking. So good for them.
Yeah, great. Well, I think that's a great place for us to take a pause. If anyone wants to raise their hand and come off mute, if you've got a little bit more of a question you'd rather ask, feel free to raise your hand to do so. Otherwise, I'm going to take a moment to plug Tucson Audubon's effort to engage on the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. And it's something I end with on all of these free to fly webinars. But if you're not yet familiar, we have launched an initiative called our Virtual Flyway. And as I mentioned before, it's really a storytelling effort. So you can go to our website, sign up for our emails, but it's also really easy to find. It's called Free to Fly Tucson Audubon's Virtual Flyway. And what we're asking everyone to do is to pick your favorite Arizona migratory bird. There's a list, makes it really easy. And then tell us your story about that bird. I've gotten all kinds of examples now, so it's almost hard to give an example, but it really ranges from a personal experience to a story to something you find interesting, art submissions, photographs. And that's going to be really useful for me, and I hope for other decision makers as well, to really make that human connection, that all of these things are connected, and it's important for us to care about these things. So I'll make sure that all of those links, and as well with the letters and everything else goes out in the follow-up email. So you'll get all that information shortly. And I don't see any raised hands, so I don't know if Sarah and Steve, you want any closing comments, anything that we forgot to talk about But we really want to make sure that we're respectful of your time as well.
Well, thank you again for having me on, and I am hopeful that that better days are ahead, and that we're going to continue making progress to conserve birds and maintain our environmental safety net.
Yeah, positive note. That's good.
I would agree, and I just wouldn't. You can't underestimate the impact that you can have on your decision makers at home, and so continue to tell those stories, put them on social media, give them a call, right? We can work, we have templates, we can help, and I'm sure Nicole can too, and Steve, if you want to write a letter to the editor, but that shapes public opinion. It shapes your decision makers' understanding of what you expect. And I think we've already shown, just in the change we saw from December 23rd, 2017, when the opinion first came out, to where we are now, how much of an impact we can all have. So again, thank you for everything that you're doing. And thank you for taking the time to listen, and look forward to continuing to work together.
Yeah, well, huge thank you to Steve and Sarah. Again, I wouldn't be able to do anything without you guys. So thanks for supporting all of us. And thank you all for being on this call, and look for next steps. So thanks everyone. And I'll start signing off here, but feel free to stay on and chat if you would like as well. Hi, everyone.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Sarah.
I know,
All right.
see everyone's faces, Luke. This is fun.
Yeah.
Flashing on the screen.
All right. We'll see you guys later.